Just before we go on, do we want to do a brief introduction?
We'll introduce ourselves, stand with Tom, please.
So, Tom Roberts, Scrutiny Support Officer.
Councillor Elizabeth Haynes.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Councillor Stuart Ashley.
Sue Brown, Council Officer for Partnerships.
Linda Purdy, Head of Public Services Support Unit.
Rachel O'Shaughnessy, Sustainability Manager.
Fen Turner from Natural Resources Wales.
And Adrian Huckin from Melling Homes.
Dominique Redmond, Democratic Services Officer.
So I've been advised that it's a very general report and there's no reason to declare any particular interest. Obviously, if discussions do end up going into an area where members do have a vested interest, then it's probably best to declare it at that time.
I've had a brief look through them. I can't see anything that's untoward. That's why I was the only one there. I'd like to what's the word? Move. Sorry, I should think. Well, sorry, I've been away. That's an accurate record, if I may, please. I can't see that there's anything that needs bringing up either.
Okay. Yeah, it was just the one action relating to the recommendations from the previous meeting. We've had the response, and I believe they're now all up on modern.gov on the website. So it's all done and dusted.
How local objectives have been set. Decisions made by the Public Services Board in relation to the draft plan. The steps the Board proposes to take to meet the identified objectives, using their knowledge and experiences, provide comments on where and how the plan can be improved. Could I ask Lyndon please to do a short review?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, members. I'll just take you through a very brief overview of where we've come to this position. In front of you today, we're asking to scrutinise the methodology to how we've developed the draft wellbeing plan, which is currently out to 12-week consultation, and this board, as the Chair's mentioned, is a statutory consultee in this process. As members here, you and only Councillor Ashley was at the previous scrutiny of this. It may be helpful if I just take you through a little bit of a journey of how we got to this point. If it goes on too long, Chair, I'm sure you'll tell me. In response to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, this Council and other public bodies must have a statutory wellbeing plan in place in 2018. Now, to get to this stage, we've had to undertake a number of different processes. The one being the development of a wellbeing assessment that would inform what needs to be in the wellbeing plan, and also that we've had to establish the statutory public service board, whereas the previous local service board was not a statutory board, and members attended there outside of a statutory process. In terms of the journey, it's very important for this committee to note that this has not been a council-driven plan. This is a whole part to great lengths to ensure that all of the partners, both statutory and non, have been included in every stage of how we've adopted the process to undertaking the wellbeing assessment, and also how we've incorporated all partners' views in the development of the draft wellbeing plan, of which you probably know would be at a very high level. And it's important to note that because the legislation makes it very clear that the wellbeing plan is a partnership plan. The onus is on the council to do the administration part of the plan, but the development of this plan is critical that everybody has the buy-in, and in order to have the buy-in of the plan, we've gone to a great deal of joint progress to ensure that every partner's had their opportunity to contribute, that each partner's had an opportunity to lead a number of themes, to which we have 2 of the theme leads here today for this committee, to bring us to this stage. We've taken the wellbeing assessment to the Public Services Board with our suggestion that we have 3 overarching objectives that we need to develop into the plan. They were around a healthy Torfaen, a wealthy and prosperous Torfaen, and a Torfaen where people live in a good environment and can benefit from the environment. From that process, we've developed a whole partnership officer support group. I initially chaired that group. That group is now being chaired by Adrian Huckin for the next 3 meetings, and after the 3 meetings by there, it's going to be chaired by Fen. So in the way in which we try to develop this plan, in the way in which we've involved all partners in the process, taking the work forward now through the officer support group, that's also going to be chaired not by a member of the local authority, but also by partners. So in that way, I wanted to give some confidence to the committee that we are involving all partners in the development of this plan where we are. Moving on to the next stage, as part of the officer support group, we've met frequently to identify within those 3 overarching objectives what are the objectives that would the PSB be considering under those 3 broad headings as the objectives that need to sit within the wellbeing plan to which now we are consulting. You would note that there's a process map within the report on the position to where we are at this present day, and we're currently on position 10 within that flow chart. That's on page 17 of your report back. And from that process, we initially identified 9 wellbeing objectives that we would want to take forward. The PSB considered that 2 of the 9 objectives could be conflated into the other objectives, so therefore we are bringing forward to this, under the consultation document, 7 wellbeing objectives. Those wellbeing objectives have been approved by the PSB to go to statutory consultation. They are within the report pack that you have and within the detailed wellbeing plan as an appendix to your pack, and we are currently consulting on those wellbeing objectives. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, because unless anybody's got anything else to add on the process of where we are, I'm happy to take questions from you and the committee.
Thank you, Linda.
Sorry, can we start by looking at the methodology employed to develop the draft plan? Can you tell us a little bit about the mechanisms used to ensure maximum level of consultation feedback? Please.
Sorry, Councillor, when you say consultation, do you mean consultation with partners or with the public?
I think with everyone. Consultation in terms of we've got the draft.
Sorry, okay. Yes, they're statutory consultees. They've all been sent the link to the plan on the website, which is the usual method, followed up by some of them we're already in contact with on other things, so there'll be encouragement for people to respond. There's also a statutory requirement on some of those people to respond. So when those responses come in, we'll be looking at the content, we'll be tabling that on probably spreadsheets and different ways, and looking at any of the comments that sit outside of what we've already got. Some of those we hope will confirm that we're on the right path and where we're going. Any extra information that we get, we will use that and present that in a report back to the PSB when that goes forward. We have got an engagement group which brings together engagement officers across all the different partners that sit around the table at the PSB, and all of those are promoting the consultation with their own officers in their own organisations and with their customers, service users, however you like to put it, and with the general public. So we've gone out quite widely. So out of that group there, I've also sent it out a lot wider to probably about 150 different people have had it, to know that it's out there, and then they can spread that information. As I say, as we did with the assessment and as we do with other things, when information comes back, that is quite a big exercise to log it down as it comes in and to look at comments against what we've said.
It's helpful. If I can just follow up a little, is that okay, Chair? I might have a declaration of interest here. I work for a voluntary organisation, Guide Dogs Cymru, so I'm particularly interested in disability and equality issues. I'll mention that just in case we stray into anything like that. How do you decide which voluntary organisations to consult with? That's one issue. And the second issue is, will there be any public engagement meetings? I noticed, I was reading the Caerphilly draft wellbeing plan today, and they've set out they're going to hold 3 public consultation events. Are we planning to do anything similar in Torfaen?
We haven't done that because the work that Caerphilly are doing now, we did back in the summer, and we had some events and help questions with the public around what did they think wellbeing meant to them and what could they feed in. How do they want to get involved? So we've already got that information that we're holding. So when we do the bit of work, which will probably one of your other questions we'll come on to around getting some of the detail under those high-level statements that we've got in the plan at the moment, once we work out what those are, then we can go to where people have said they would like to be involved, what they wanted to be involved with, and work with those people going forward over a number of months or years to be involved in some of that work. When I talked to engagement officers, that's not my speciality, their advice was, and I think we've referred to it hopefully in the covering report, we have to balance going out to consultation and consultation fatigue. And we'd had comments from members of the public saying the council have asked us about our wellbeing, housing associations have asked us about our wellbeing, social services are asking us about our wellbeing, you're asking us, what are you doing and why do you keep asking us? We want to see, until we know what some of the detailed actions are, then, we feel that we've already said about our wellbeing. So it is trying to get a balance, and obviously we're in touch with those other organisations around what information are they having from members of the public as well. Sorry.
When you finish,
okay.
I wanted to ask on that.
Regards third sector organisations, then TVA is the representative around the table, and so I have sent it to them, and they will be sending it out, hopefully, through their network to their wider, and if you're not getting it in the organisation that you're with, I can let them know and make sure that it's gone wider.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Stephen Ash.
Yeah, that was my concern as well, because obviously TVA has something around the region of 300-400 organisations, and there are actually some sitting outside of that set as well, certainly in the environmental and other aspects of some things like care organisations. I mean, the concern is obviously, and you note it, is have you got the right pitch in terms of people? And you said about fatigue. It's one that always, we get to the right people. We know that from council work, and I'm sure it's the same in other organisations. Are you getting to the right people, and are you getting the right thing back? Because obviously, the preemptive side of this, I just wonder.
Thank you, Stuart. Somebody like your reply?
I think it's going to be a bit of a balancing act. It's difficult to judge how much we're going to get back. Historically, with issues of this nature, the response rate is not as high as it would be if it was something that local communities had a real issue with, such as closing the school or whatever. So whatever information we get back is beneficial to us, and we will feed that then into the document that we'll be providing as part of the consultation process. That will feed into what we need to take forward. How we capture everyone is as Sue has mentioned, through the strategic engagement group. But again, if members know of any groups that have a particular interest in this that wouldn't normally be consulted in this is an ideal opportunity for us to be able to attract those individuals if we could.
I read with interest what the Commissioner obviously was using, and people like the Gwent Wildlife Trust report. I mean, there were a lot of reports in the stuff the Commissioner came back with, and some of that stuff, I don't know if it's been fed back into us. Rachel might correct me on this, but certainly, when I went back and looked at the stuff from the Commissioner, there were a lot of reports there, and how you feed that stuff back into what we're doing. I say we because we're all in it. Looking at stuff like the ecology, I mean, I know the biodiversity group produces reams of stuff on this. So how do you feed back in?
Mention that, Councillor Ashley, because we are actually doing a session with that biodiversity group. Yeah. It's Torvine Local Nature Partnership now it's called. Yeah. So that's early December. So Fen, myself and Andrew Osborne, are coming along to do a session around the consultation process for that group specifically, because they have really been very engaged through the process.
Okay.
I suppose it's a very similar question in how did you engage with local businesses? Because I'm quite honestly, I'm a little bit concerned that the fatigue that you mentioned, are we using the same group of people all the time to consult with? And what I would like to see is how are we reaching out to other businesses, other organisations, other people. I suppose there is a declaration to be had. I run a couple of small businesses, and from a personal viewpoint, I wouldn't have known how to have engaged in this with the business cap on. So are we only going to the business forum? I'm very concerned that we are using the same groups of people continually and not going outside of that. And that's my concern.
Hello, afternoon. I think just a couple of things to comment on and pick up this point as well. In terms of developing the wellbeing plan, and I think it is referred to in the report, prior to going out, there was a previous round of consultation, hence the theme started to emerge, and encouragingly, for some of the things I've been working on, the theme around wealth, so anti-poverty stuff sort of started to come to the fore, really. So from an officer support group, which myself and Fen sit on, from partners and we're local businesses as well, there's been some involvement up to this date in terms of crafting it, really. So that's where some of the themes have come from. So there has been a level of engagement. I think it's fair to say is as we go into the how bit, the next phase of it, really, and that's part of today, and obviously the consultation is to ensure that we do use some of the existing mechanisms within Torvine to connect with local businesses to seek and obtain views. But I suppose what we're trying to achieve with the Wellbeing Act and the heart of the legislation really is whatever we come out with has got to add value. So we have had a look at, for instance, Torvine's approach to economic development, if you like, and we've had regard to other things as well. But what we've been encouraged to look at is come up with things that are going to add value, from across the public realm in a sense. So I think there's still opportunities through the consultation to reach sort of groups and small businesses, and I think that's been a national criticism, I suspect, as well from the office in Cardiff across the piece, to how are we engaging with the private sector in particular, but also with local businesses. So there's some opportunities to do that locally coming up in terms of the consultation. But I also think whatever we're going to pick in terms of the wider strategic objectives, there can't be things that we would be doing anyway in the public realm. It's got to be something that's going to add value to Torvine in particular. So I think it's on it's point 5 onwards in terms of developing the plan shows how we've come to where we're at in terms of some of the approaches, in terms of the themes. But I certainly take on board your point around making sure we do a deep dive now in terms of some of the local businesses as well.
I am just concerned that that the report, we've already had a question about we're not going out to do any consultation events as such. I'm just concerned that we're relying on the same old groups and the same old method of collecting this and consulting with the same groups of people continually, and we're missing a trick there if we're not engaging with other people and actively searching out other voluntary organisations, other businesses, other individuals that don't participate. Then we are missing a trick, because their opinions are always not going to be fed into this, and there is a large percentage of people out there that don't engage, that we need to engage with somehow. So if we're not doing any other more formal consultations than going through our normal channels, how do we reach those people is what I'm asking.
But how to reach hard to reach groups is a thing we have as a problem, and I was sort of reading through other approaches other councils done. It does seem to be a universal problem. And certainly when you start looking at the wealth and not wealth side of things, how we get... Obviously social media is one way that people have been looking at it. Have you got any fresh new ideas that you've been borrowing from other places? Because that's a typical scrutiny question, but it's a good one. And it's the innovative side, and certainly where young people are concerned, and people that are hard to reach. I only put this, it's not even on our set of questions, but it's one of those ones that's come out. I certainly, when you ask under 30-year-olds how you do this, and I think we've got to learn there a bit. And that is a problem about, I'm just having conversations down at community council level about things like youth councils and stuff like that. This is coming off the top of my head at the moment, by the way, but it's how you reach those, and whether you've had a view of talking to young people about how, because they're notoriously difficult. I mean, I sit on things like CCYP, but how you engage with them, and all these issues, they're the major stakeholders in a lot of this.
I think if I start back on that one.
Yeah.
We have, as I say, got this engagement group of engagement officers that Neil Jones chairs up and Kath Cleves. But as I say, it brings in people from all the other partners around the table, and I suppose it's those that we rely on to tell us, what's the best way, because if I write something for engagement, somebody else might look at it and say, that's a policy, Sue, that's not going to resonate at all with members of the public or who we want to contact with. So I'm not passing the buck, but I do feel that we are, reliant on their advice, their contacts and how they go out. I have sent it to the Chamber of Commerce, and I appreciate that not all businesses are part of that. But again, if any of you have got any contact or groups that you feel we could send it out to or add to our list, or check with our engagement officers where it could be, that would be helpful, councillors. Perhaps Linda wants to come in a bit.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question, Councillor Ashley, on the hard to reach groups. We recognised very early in the process that the Commissioner Sophie Howe is expecting us to be engaging in as far wide a group as we possibly can. With the best will in the world, we're not going to be able to attract a response from everyone. But we've got, we're based within the council, we've got a community cohesion officer who's been engaging on our behalf with some of the hard to reach groups, particularly Gypsy Traveller Families he's been involved with, and the other groups that are relating to the community cohesion activities that Crescent undertakes. So we have gone as wide as we could on that basis. I would also add at this point that this whole process is time driven, so we are working to a timeline that's within the statute, and that timeline has been pressured from day one for us to get to the stages where we are now. So we've got some time constraints, although we probably would do this differently if we had no time constraints. And we would be, and if we had some additional capacity, which is something that you're probably used to receiving as members, around the engagement part of it with the public. We've gone as far as we can go with the resources that we have got, using, as Sue mentioned, the significant contacts that we have in the strategic engagement group. We are contacting other groups outside of this. We had 333 responses to the wellbeing assessment from the public previously, which was much better than what we had in. No?
We had 1,300.
1,300, sorry.
To the assessment, 333 to the summer questioning.
Right. So my point around this is that we are working very hard to try to get some responses back from this, and we've got more responses this time around than we did when we took the single plan through the process of engagement some years ago. But,
1,300.
1,300 responses.
To the assessment work that we did last summer.
Interesting stuff.
Lyndon, I'm glad you mentioned community cohesion. I'll park it for now, but when we come to looking at the objectives, I'm a bit surprised there's not much mention of hate crime in the plan, but we'll park that for now. If we can just stick to some of the methodology. The gentleman from Mellin mentioned the key theme around wealth, and there's a mention of housing, and you said you're from Mellin. I was a bit surprised that social housing isn't included as an improvement objective, because as councillors, what hits us at the constituency level all the time is lack of social housing, and that's a real feature of being a local councillor.
Yeah.
And then when we read through the plan, it didn't really feature very highly, and I just wondered why.
I was just what I was alluding to earlier, really. First, I was going to say, I'm putting my housing hat on. I'm fully behind you with that, and anything we can do to create more land available to create more affordable homes, particularly in Torfaen, has my full support. And we're working very closely with your colleagues to try and achieve that. I suppose the issue when we were looking at the themes was very much about, again, where we can make a difference, because I have to say, looking at the affordable housing sort of deficit that we got, we are already working strategically across Torfaen with colleagues to try and address those issues. And it's come up in debate, very much come up in debate. But the issue is, and I'm sure the future generation, so Commissioner's Office, I should say, when looking at this, would say, well, one is expecting a lot of these things to be happening anyway. What's the added ingredients to it? So we underpicked a lot of the stuff underneath that kind of wealth and prosperity sort of banner. There's a whole range of things underneath there which starting to figure in some of those areas where we want to sort of tackle employment and low pay and the apprenticeships and that level. So we realise there's a shortage of affordable accommodation. We're working within the planning system and with the local authorities to be addressing that, and that's our day job as far as we see it. Where can we add difference? The difference coming together publicly. And I think it's trying to pool our efforts to try and deal with some of these inequality issues, around pay and around the wealth and the prosperity. And then the affordability issue, which is really key to us. So it's one thing about providing accommodation, it's what's then affordable for people. We felt that if we're not raising the levels, the wage levels in particular, for those in work as well, because there are jobs out there, but obviously a lot of them are at a low pay level. We need to raise those wage levels. Then if there's accommodation available, then some people can't afford to get on the ladder because they either haven't got the deposit or they can't afford the running costs of the home. So affordability, we felt, was a real issue. I'm not ducking the issue of supply. It's still an issue, but I think we're working, like I said earlier, strategically, with your colleagues in Torfaen and the other housing associations, to try and address some of the affordable housing issues. So certainly not ducking it. It's certainly come out as a major conversation topic, and it may well come out with a consultation that's happening now with the public. It still might be an area that the public are going to come back to and talk about the lack of supply. But what we have noticed from the first round of discussions, conversations that we've had, is there's a real issue of affordability, and pay is figuring quite highly, really. So it's about adding value, again, as I said earlier, really, and what can we do, what are the themes that could add value over and above what we should be doing, and I'll put my housing hat on in terms of trying to increase the supply of housing.
As a voice of constituents, we do feel supply should be in there, if I'm honest. Can I just carry on with another question on the methodology? This is back to Lyndon, I think. The DWIS website was used for mapping existing services. What other website information sources were considered during the process? Please.
What page are you on there, Councillor?
Mapping of existing services, page 19, 562. And you talk about a lot of health and social care services are registered on the DWIS website, which is a good website, but I know there's a lot of other sources of data out there.
Right throughout this whole process, hence the need to pull all the partners together, is that we are not going to know from a single organisational point mapping the existing services around the areas that we don't. DWIS is in there as an example, but we use the partners from around the table to help us to map out, as it says in the report there, those areas that we've needed to include in the process. So, whereas DWIS has been given as a specific example in there, we have, as an officer support group and wider, used the collective experience and knowledge to be pulling in that collective to establish what we considered to be using the evidence and the data and the engagement and all the other processes to identify those wellbeing objectives going forward. So that's in there as an example more than anything else, Councillor. But it's a very important point, because there is so much out there. There is a huge amount of information out into the public arena. We can capture what we can to put this process together and to consider what those objectives are going to be. And now we're up for a further consultation period. Any issues or anything that we may have missed with that, that's why it's coming to scrutiny today, that you think that we could be looking at as well, would be helpful to receive as part of the recommendations of this committee.
One question before you, Stuart, please. Looking at page 22, 5821, essentially the consultation is taking place between 16th of October 2017 and the 7th of January 2018.
Yeah.
Is all the residents, are they out of the residents know? Have you sent letters out, or have you just asked them to go onto a website?
We haven't sent letters out to residents, Councillor. It is on our website. We've used the strategic engagement group to get the messages out to organisations. I've been racking my brains to try to understand whether it's been put into an edition of Torvine Talks, and I just raised the quick question. It has. So it's going to go to every resident within Torvine Talks as well. I was just rattling my brains. I'm sure it was, but I just couldn't get it quite to mesh there.
Sorry, just to confirm that, they put it into Torvine Talks, just a small paragraph with the website, because I think there was so much other information in there, but that's all Gareth put in.
The thing you concern people on the site. Wrong one.
We have let TVA and all the others, if they come across anybody who can't access websites, they're printing off copies and taking hard copies out to people. So Kath Cleves and some of the other engagement officers, where they're connected to groups, we might not be doing something public outside Tesco's or B&Q or whatever this time round, but they are connecting to lots of different forums and groups that we know meet out there, and where they know that there might be a difficulty, or they take some paper copies along with them, encourage people to go onto the website, simply because as officers, if we get lots of responses, it's easier to to collect those from an electronic method than it is to actually get lots of hard copies and then have to officer time to input those to the electronic system to draw out the report of all the responses. But we do allow, that not everybody either wants to use or can use a website.
The thing that worries me is that, like, I got a few residents, we probably all have, who just can't use a website, and I'm just wondering how we're going to get to these people that's not part of any group or anything.
I think it's a case of trying to get to where we are within the resources that we have got. I think that's the crux point for us. We're trying to utilise where we can electronic communications, because that goes far and wide. We do have some issues of as I mentioned earlier, this is quite a complex process that we've got up to this stage. It's included a huge amount of our officer time, and we are working within an envelope of capacity that we have. So, as the lead for this, as the officer lead for this, and I'm confident that within the resource envelope that we've got, we've gone as far as we can go in trying to connect as far and wide as possible. It'll never be enough, and we accept that. And as members, with other consultations that we do as a local authority on its own, we can never reach 100% of the interested parties that we have. It's never a satisfactory position to have, but it's a reality situation of we've done what we can do to get us to this stage at this point.
Thank you, Lyndon. Stuart, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was going to say, the last question we got on here, it might be slightly different, I don't know. I got a question here, is how is PSB promoting itself during the process so that Torvine residents are able to understand its role? And there's two questions in there. One is the process you're doing at the moment for this draft report, under methodology this is. But the other thing is, obviously, you're a new institution, I suspect, a new group, whatever you want to call it, because it's totally new. What I think what you want is PSB for Dummies kind of thing, isn't it? I'm thinking this when we're talking about this, but it's as simple a thing as you can say, this is a new process, we're bringing everybody together, collecting data and doing work. It's how you structure something like that. Can you do it? And put it on the website, put it out, as the Chair was saying, so we can get this understandable, because this sits over the top of the Council, the Health Board and everybody else. They're working together in partnership. Can we write this? On one page A4, and there's one for you.
That's not going to happen, Councillor Ashley.
We're asking. I just know it's how you do something like that. No. How you get it intelligible.
I think you're quite right.
Yeah.
I mean,
I asked for it.
That's fine. We have, as an organisation, because the council is the administrator within the legislation of the Public Service Board, we've now got a Public Service Board specific web page, which was website. Sorry. Yeah, I'm glad Sue was here, because my good. Yeah, she's very good. But there is the PSB website that we can put people onto. Without doing a mass communication across the borough of telling people what the Public Service Board is, or whether gauging what the interest in the borough would be around what a Public Service Board is food for thought for the future. When we do that, it would be nice to have a wellbeing plan that's signed off in order that you can emphasise what is going to be in that plan in the year ahead. So that could be something that we could perhaps consider as part of the publication of the wellbeing plan and getting that information out next year to the general public. But it was the same scenario when we had the local service board. Yes. Unless you have an interest in this arena, there isn't a great deal of publicity, and that's Wales nationally, Welsh governments. If you're interested in those sorts of arenas, you tend to go and find where those products are. But we could do, as part of, as I said, as part of the promotion of the wellbeing plan next year, have a sort of a front end that says this is what the Public Service Board does, this is who sits on it, these are their functions, pretty much follow what's on the website and put some links in.
John?
Can I just, Peter, we've been talking a little bit really about accessibility here
Yeah.
in terms of,
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
and you mentioned then the Welsh Government. Now the Welsh Government, when they do a public consultation, they'll do the same as you, so many weeks, but they normally have an easy read version for people with,
exactly
with learning difficulties, people, they'll have an accessible version for people with sight loss. Have we given any thought to those sort of issues, prior to going out to consultation?
We didn't, I believe, I'm sure we certainly did an executive summary around what the wellbeing assessment was going to deliver for us, but we haven't done any other versions. We were considering looking at, in a similar way the Welsh Government did, an animated film around what the objectives when they did Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and publicised that piece of information out into the... We did look at the animation part of it. That came at a cost that we couldn't put out there. But we haven't done an easy read version or put in any other format other than what it is at the moment. Because
I raised the easy read issue, not that I'm suggesting that you put everything into easy read, but one of the things we found, and we're moving into general comments now in a sense, one of the things we found when we were reading the objectives is it is written, if you like, in sort of statutory local government speak, if you like, and that's going to be very difficult for a lot of our constituents to deal with. So we were wondering if that will you be testing this document for plain English at some stage? Because obviously we want this document so it affects every one of our citizens. We want it to be accessible for everyone.
I think you've done a reasonable job on it when I looked at the full colour version, but I even would doubt even other people, I'm not saying who, that when you see the letter, it's got 20 reports, it's a difficult thing because there's so much information in there. But looking at graphic ways of doing it, which we've done with scrutiny, must be a way of looking at it. The other thing is, if you've got a task, there is a debate about whether this thing is task orientated or outcomes orientated, which is the old debate we always have with these things. Whether there's a lot of data behind it is always the other big problem. I've been around enough on these committees to know that one. You want a simple read, an executive summary, and then you want to be able to refer back. But you can do that relatively simple if you use graphics and all the smiley faces and all the rest of the stuff. But what is there that engages with people so they can make a view about the sort of thing? It's worth testing that out. I think I agree with Peter on this one. And we can do that in various methodologies. That is something that we've discussed and I'm sure you're quite capable of producing, so it's intelligible, but it's got to be outcomes orientated so people know what you're doing. And we were having a nice debate about this being a high-level thing. It certainly has. But even for people engaged at that level, it's got to be intelligible.
Right, would you pile Lyndon to...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments. It's readable, but it's complicated.
Yes.
We get that. The documents that sit behind it is what the Commission is expecting us to produce for people to have the evidence to have a look behind, so it's not pulled from pie in the sky thinking, and that's where we are with this, which is a very high level document, and it's at a high level document stage because we're having to keep to the statutory timescales to get us to developing where the plan comes from. If it's the thought of this committee that as we going through this consultative stage, we'll then start to develop what the wellbeing plan will look like, whether the committee is thinking that the outcome of the consultation and developing of the wellbeing plan, which every public body has to sign off, who's a statutory member of this board. So that includes the local authority, Fire and Rescue Service, and Irene Bevan, University Health Board, and Natural Resources Wales. Those are the 4 statutory partners that have to sign this plan off. Once that plan is in place, if there's a thought of this committee that to augment that plan, it would be helpful to have an easy read plan that sits to the side of it, or we look at other methodologies that would help people understand the basics of the plan and try to pare it back. We could do that, but it may lose some of the detail in the data as part of that, but that would be a consequence of having to do that piece of work. Is that something that the committee is suggesting that we should have been looking at prior to us going to consultation, but we are where we are, and that could be something that we would look at going forward?
My feeling is it's always handy to have an easy read version of the consultation document, because that encourages response, I believe. And I used to work for the Welsh Government, so I'm very familiar with doing public consultations. But even later, if there's an easy read version of the final plan produced, that's helpful to people. So, and I understand fully, Lyndon, your point about there's resource implications for all this, and I accept that. It's just really about thinking of imaginative ways of getting the best response from the people you're trying to engage with.
The important thing is that it's intelligible at all levels, and it's not patronising, because end of the day you can have some easy read things that are actually quite patronising. You need to be able to put decision, everybody votes for this at our level, but you need to be able to see through what you're getting value for money, as a council, health authority, whatever, so that they're all stakeholders, and all stakeholders need to understand the process. It's really, really quite important.
Hello. When we were writing the plan, we did, Rachel and I spoke about using infographics as a really useful way of portraying an idea, especially around a place, and that helps to sort of de-silo the process a little bit as well. But we were just so up against it with time that we just didn't manage it. But that is something that we're thinking about looking deeper into for when the plan goes out proper. But we're trying.
I was about to say I've seen some work on this. I think.
I don't work for this organisation, I'm not plugging them, but Learning Disability Wales were funded by the Welsh Government, have produced this weighty tome about guidance on easy read. It's all available on their website. It's just an example of a resource that's out there that is beneficial to statutory third sector everyone.
Just a question, Councillor Jones. Does this organisation take documents and put them into easy read?
They're the main group the main people that the Welsh Government use for all their easy read documents. So the Welsh Government tend to rely on them to, when you read the consultations the Welsh Government are putting out all the time, they're the main people that they commission to write easy read documents.
I was expecting this question to come along. Are they funded by Welsh Government to support?
Virtually 100% funded by Welsh Government on a grant funding basis under the Equalities Grant, I believe.
Is that to support all organisations or the Welsh Government specific?
No, they're
you can see what I'm going with.
This organisation. No, I'm not plugging this organisation in any shape or form. I'm aware of this. That they're an all Wales organisation that support people with learning disabilities. But they've, as we're talking about accessibility, I'm aware that they've got a guide to easy read, which is available on their website, and I don't think there's a cost involved with that. I mean, I was just throwing that into the mix.
Good one, isn't it?
Right, and one question here. What are the timeframes implied by short, medium and long term?
That's open to debate. And each public service board will be looking at that from a different perspective. The way in which we are trying to look at the short, medium and long term is that within the short term, because the structure of the PSBs are based around electoral cycles as well. The short term we're considering what can we effectively do within the first 5 years. Medium term is 5 to 10, and the longer term is 10 to 15.
Yeah.
At the public service boards, and I would imagine Sophie's got a different view on what Sophie considers to be the short, medium and longer term view, but our view is, or from my public service board is, although we're trying to think generationally ahead, 20, 30 years, and certainly Rachel and Fen live in this world around forecasting ahead, is we need to, the ideas that are coming out of the wellbeing plan, they will need to be put into actions at some point during the short, medium and longer term. So there will be prioritisation exercises that will need to be undertaken during, well, we're currently working through those now, on within the officer support group, of what can we tackle, and bearing in mind this is what can we tackle in partnership, not one organisation tackling in one problem on their own. What can we tackle in partnership over the short, medium and longer term, and that's going to form part of our planning processes going forward as the wellbeing plan matures. This is an iterative process as well, and the Commissioner's gone at lengths to say, I'm expecting you to change tack if things change tack on you. So we, as organisations ourselves and as a local authority, we know that policy changes the way in which organisations operate on whichever level of government brings in a certain policy, whether that's national, regional or local. In the same way in which we're trying to look at this planning process, these are what we are thinking are the wellbeing objectives for Torfaen over the next X number of years. This is what we plan to do in years 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15 and beyond. So it's very much looking at it in that scope. We also need to be, when we're looking at scoping these issues, is we have to be realistic. Adrian's mentioned on more than one occasion this afternoon very helpfully the fact that the Commissioner is looking at public service boards as partners to add value, not duplicate businesses already as a matter of course within that organisation. And that's quite critical really when you start to unpick some of the issues around each of those objectives where people say, well, my world isn't in there. Well, your world is in there, but you may have to unpick it a little bit. So you mentioned community cohesion earlier on, Councillor Jones. That's obviously sitting within the community safety part of it. It may not say within the wellbeing plan, community cohesion is this, but there will be elements of community cohesion contributing to elements of the action planning process within the wellbeing plan. It's another, if you go through the plan, you will note that there's no direct reference to education in it, as it was within the single plan. But the education links into all of the wellbeing objectives and the wealth objective as well. So coming back full circle really to around where the Chair mentioned what's it meant by short, medium and longer term. I think it'd be reasonable for us to think in those 5-year stages and review those as we intend to review the plan on a regular basis, and the plan is going to get reviewed within the first 2 years rather than 5 years, because we think it may change. Our thoughts may change as that go forward.
Can I come in a sec? Yes, please. In a sense, Lyndon, you've answered a question that we were wrestling with earlier in the week.
So we could go back to
let's call it a frustration.
It was.
One of the sort of frustrations we had when we were looking at the plan is that, and accepting all you've just said, and accepting that this is very high level, because you've made that point many times in your paper, but the actions they read more like goals, but there's no specific in it. So the impression I got when you were chatting then, what we were looking for was we want something more specific, something that someone's going to be accountable for, one of these partners. So is there going to be a nice plan with time frames, and that's where the Chair was asking about short, medium and long. Who's going to be held to account for the delivery of those plans? How are they going to be measured? So we're looking for the smart stuff in there, and that's the frustration we had when we read it.
That's perfectly understandable, because this is a high level plan. that we're working on. The reality of the situation is that what you're asking for is what we're currently working on now. Our officer support group, we've got a facilitated session on the 14th of November, which has started to unpick exactly what you were saying there. If these are the objectives that sit, or these are the objectives that you are consulting on at the moment, they may change, they may not, but we can't take the chance of them changing or not. So we're already working on that particular plan as part of the ongoing work that we're doing as an officer support group. So on the 14th, we've Natural Resources Wales has financed a consultant to come in as a partner, which has been very helpful to us, to help us with the leads within the Public Service Board at officer group level. These are the wellbeing objectives that we're consulting on at the moment. What is going to be your contribution to that wellbeing objective in terms of what are we going to put into it, who is going to lead on it, and what specific outcomes are we looking to get from that within the short, medium and longer term. So the work you're asking us about now is work that's in progress now. Yeah, of course you can do.
Lyndon Putty, in a previous life, obviously. But no, I think the other thing why that's important. So you fit right at the heart of what we're trying to do over the next few weeks, in a sense. The other real important issue of credibility with this is it does link into the discussion we had earlier about sort of the audience, and who we're trying to communicate with, and particularly the most important people, obviously the citizens of, Torvine here. We've got to make sure that whatever we set within that short-term frame, and the 5-year figure is what has been referred to by Lyndon. Reason for that as well, and we know the future generation issue is much longer than that, but we've got to show some pretty early wins, I think, for the public. So the public, to understand what the Public Service Board is all about, if you like, and what difference the Public Service Board is making, is really going to be quite key in the first couple of years in terms of whatever objectives we come up with, smart objectives that we actually deliver. We've then got a credibility, a track record to refer back to and say, well, you've got this delivered now from the Public Service Board, which you wouldn't have had delivered by all the other constituent parts working independently. But by together, you're working, together, you've now achieved this. And that's the test for us over the next couple of weeks, I think, the next month or so, I suppose, which is identifying some ones that we can pick up very early on. Clearly, there's going to be some objectives that are very much more of a slow burner, really, because you're changing changing the culture, sometimes changing some of the organisational stuff that we do. But some of the early stuff, because otherwise we won't have the credibility, I don't think, in terms of in the public's mind. So then we can go out and talk to the wider audience, post-April, and say, these are the objectives we've set for year 1 or year 1 to 5. We're then held accountable in terms of we've achieved those. And if you then look back, you've got a bit of a narrative to say, we said we were going to do this to the public, and we can say we've delivered it. But the public got to be able to see that we're doing that, which is adding value. And I'm going back to my point, but in the report it does cover it quite adequately, where it says the Future Generation Commissioner and Welsh Government have made it clear that they see the work of public service boards and wellbeing plans as something that adds value to the public and does not cover existing business. So we've got to pick some topics and some themes that we can collectively add value to, we could be judged against in terms of our performance and monitored. So it's quite key over the next few weeks, I think, in terms of development. But we will get to the position, I think, Councillor, where you've raised a very important point, where you've got smart targets, people are accountable. And it won't just be at a local authority level, because, as Lyndon quite rightly said, this is across the public service realm. So I suppose the key for me, and Fen, I suppose, from the Officer Support Group, is once we've come up with some of those, as a group, some of those ideas, the PSB itself, the pressure will be back onto the PSB to fully support that, because we need every member of that Public Service Board body behind it, really. Thank you, Chair.
Stuart?
Yeah.
I think going back to your previous comment, really, we were sort of, some of the discussions we've had have been around the planning authority not being seen to be taking part in this, and going back to the comments we've made about social housing, etc. there seems to there's a conflict there, and we were quite concerned that none of that was there was very little in the plan. So your comment was it was pleasing to hear that that you know that your statement there. So for us, the planning authority was, or not being seen as being part of the plan, was a concern. But your comment has sort of eradicated that concern now. So.
I'm interested in what you say about existing work which doesn't include in this, and stuff which you kind of sweep up, which becomes part of this. I mean, what's interesting is the stuff that the voluntary sector and the innovative side of this does, which you could. It goes all through what Sophie Howe was saying about some of the stuff around some of the green projects and stuff like Solver Care, which I happen to know about because it won a prize at the One Voice Wales. It's a really interesting project. Those sort of projects where you can put money in. Now, the problem is with austerity and the funding and the rest of it we've got at the moment is how you put those into the mainstream, if you do, and how you fund that stuff. So, I mean, what I'm looking at is sort of, and also lives of councils and things like that, where we've got 5 years in the council, and we've got other funding regimes. All organisations, I think, are on 1 year funding. That's got to be a problem in some of this as well, isn't it?
Sorry, Chair, for just...
I'm sorry to be a bit sort of sketchy around it, but I'm just putting about 5 different ideas in there at once.
I'll just give you one example in a sense of what we've talked about. It's not saying it's come through the Office Support Group, and I'm going to want to prejudge conversations we've had with colleagues, but we've talked as an example about the way we may procure services, you know, across the public service area in Torfaen. And we're all procuring public services in all different shapes and forms, you know. There's got to be probably a better mechanism, I think, for us operating the way we procure services and where we derive benefits out of them. So, for instance, community benefits out of some of those contracts. If we derive those at scale across Torfaen, for example, we're able to reinvest some of that investment into things like we've talked about before, whether that's apprenticeships or traineeships, etc. So I thought sticks to it. And what I'm saying is an example. That's just as an example, but it's something that collectively we all do, but perhaps we could do differently, which might derive a benefit, you know, for the civic realm, you know, in Torfaen. And I'm sure there's other examples. I think the point I was kind of making is I think, you know, the PSB needs to gain some credibility, obviously, you know, when we kick it off. And I think that 5-year period that Linda was referring to, we need some areas there that we can talk to the public about, say we're going to do something, show we've demonstrated those outcomes and report back to give some credibility about the work we're doing. That's why I'm saying it's got to add some value. So, sorry, Chair, thank you.
Chair. Peter, I mean, you've answered the question I was going to ask, actually, to some extent.
Sorry,
many of the actions look like business as usual type activity, and it was hard for us to see how the PSB would be doing things differently. But you've answered that really. But it is really about this added value. And you've given us one example. Do you really think the PSB is going to, you know, the Welsh Government will push on partnership working and working across boundaries? Do you think the PSB is going to make a huge difference?
Can I take that question?
Yeah, Lyndon.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. That's really key. I think the PSB is now in a totally different place than the previous LSB. One thing, it's now statutory. So we have statutory reporting within the PSB. We've also done a huge amount of work across Gwent. We've got a Gwent Strategic Wellbeing Assessment Group, which Torfaen chairs. And part of that group is to look at what does well-being look like across Gwent. So we've got two plans running in parallel, really. Each local authority will have its own, and public board will have its own well-being plan. We're also looking at the Gwent level. Coming back to the Torfaen PSB, the Torfaen PSB has asked that we look at how we can better organise ourselves through organisational development, culture and behaviour change. To such an extent that we've got a facilitated session on the 29th of November, which the leader will be chairing, with a consultant that's helping the Officer Support Group initially, and then working with the PSB around how can we do things differently as partners to deliver on the collective. So I think Welsh Government will have a view on, and there is some interest across Gwent and wider, of the approach that Torfaen is taking specifically around how do we change culture and behaviours to act as a collective in delivering on a common goal. So, for instance, if we are looking at one of the examples Adrian gave them on procurement, how does the PSB as a collective tackle procurement, and how do the executives within that group, what are going to be their cultures and norms in looking at how that they can better deliver on those collective activities. In the past, I'll be brutally honest, we deliver things in silos. So the council will do something, the health authority will do something, Bron Avon will do something, and Melin will do something, and sometimes we'll do things as two partners together. Now we have to do things as a collective partnership on a statutory footing across the PSB. So the behaviours have to change to facilitate those actions coming out of the wellbeing plan. And that is something very positive to be looking at, in a way in which we perhaps haven't been able to do that. And there are going to be some difficulties here because there's legal constraints, there's policy constraints. But we are talking of the executives within organisations and a collective will to change and do things differently. So I think it is going to be a much positive approach than through the PSB than perhaps that we've had through the NSB, to be honest.
Sure. How the legal constraints on procurement, which you've just mentioned, it's difficult enough with one organisation when you get 8 organisations around and you want a common thing. I mean, I'm thinking what Sophie Howe talked about with social procurement, which sounds like a nightmare to me, but it's a brilliant idea if you can do social procurement for the community, which is what you're talking about, I suspect.
But part of it, but I'm talking about, when you're talking of the millions of public services spend, Adrian is mentioning the fact that we've got huge buying power, huge procurement power. What do we get as a collective, as a benefit out of that process, just using procurement as an example? These are massive issues that nobody's got the answers for at this moment in time. This is what we are going to have to be working through as part of that process.
I think the more that we invest in the how, the more likely we are to actually achieve the objectives that we've set out. I think what's really clear is we're new organisations coming and working together, and we don't really know what our potential is for procurement yet. We don't really completely understand as partners how each other works, what information each other holds. But what we need is an ambition to understand that. If we're then going to, for the benefit of Torfaen citizens, if we're then going to enable Torfaen citizens, if we're then going to realise the transformational legislation that we're required to deliver against. So that's a really important part of the whole puzzle, is the how, and we need more time there to really understand that.
Thank you. Peter?
Could I just follow up on that? You made a really good point there. If we don't change how we act as a collective, we won't be able to deliver on the plan. The PSB executives have really pushed this element of understanding this is where we need to be focusing some of our collective intelligence and resource on, particularly the how, and how do we do it as a collective rather than as an individual. And that's key.
Leader?
Thank you. That's the key point, really. You can have, statute and strategies coming out of your ears, but if you don't change the way organisations behave, and if you're not prepared to break out of silos and commit sort of resource to issues and learn about each other and build relationships and things like that, then all the strategies in the world won't, deliver what we want to do. So that's the key for me, really. It's that sort of change in behaviour of each organisation and a commitment to working together and not necessarily just protecting their own interests. And I have seen a great advance amongst the partners in that in the last 6 months alone.
Thank you, Leader. Peter? Thank you.
The leaders touched on how it's going to touch on, but I'll raise it. Both the leader and Linda mentioned the dreaded word silo, and Anthony mentioned resources. Has there been any discussions around pool budgets at all? And the reason I'm asking that is, I mean, the Gwent Trailey programme is an example where the health board and the local authorities work together and pool resources. Has been a great success. And we've talked in this meeting quite a lot about adding value. If we're really going to break down silos, we've got to pool resources to some extent. Are there any developments on that? Linda? Yeah.
Interesting question.
And we've spoken about it. But it's not just resources, it's about having the collective commitment to the objectives in the plan coming out. I would also be looking at a commitment, not just to pool resources, but I'd be looking at a commitment to share risk. Because we are talking, with resources comes risk. So we have a collective understanding of what the risk is, collective understanding of what the resource is, and a collective understanding then about how are we going to capacitate getting that going forward. And that could be quite, we've had the discussions at officer support group level. We've specifically made opportunities of accommodation within our team now to co-locate partners to be working in our team, not for us to manage those partners. They are sovereign to those organisations, and that's absolutely critical to make that point. We're creating a landscape now to which we can bring in the capacity from all the partners to be working cohesively together on the wellbeing plan and what needs to come from it. So it's a few stages, but unless there's a commitment to sharing of resources and a sharing of risk, we won't be able to do the plan. And that is part of the discussions around how we operate and behave as a PSB. The PSB contains all the chief officers and the chief executives and the senior political leadership within Torvine. So if that group can't change it, then we're not going to have a great deal of luck with anyone else.
Thank you, Lyndon.
You raised one of my favourite questions. When we did collaboration in the Resources Committee, which I think you were involved with, weren't you? We 80 odd collaborations across Gwent, in this borough, sorry. And one of the questions I asked is what the legal basis of all these committees, and some of them are quite ad hoc. And one of the questions is what are the basis you do these things on? That's not just shared resources, but it does make the question that if you've got organisations collaborating, what basis they do it on. Your ad hoc agreement, a charter, or whatever. That's one question. The other thing, for instance, I'm involved with Community Council. If you get a load of them involved with each other, what basis they do that on, and whether they would agree with each other. And so you've got a lot of very interesting settling outs to do there, for instance, because I know what Community Councils think about spending our money on this. For instance, if they had to do a shared resource thing with another Community Council or with Borough Council, there's a lot of things you need to unravel, even though it might be a good idea. Bearing in mind, Sophie Howe suggested the thing in there about community councils working in partnership in this particular thing. That's a big no-no for some elected members. So I think you need to make this process intelligible, and it's certainly for some of our elected members might be a problem. So that's where this process needs to take people along with it. I think you've got some very interesting ideas there, but it's a big emotional thing for a lot of people.
Ben?
Just really briefly, this is really complex, and if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have needed to have the legislation. And when I think about long term, I think about when my kids are growing up. So, we're starting here. This is early days, and we know we've got a long way to go, but we're ambitious that one day the next generation, maybe, let's hope it won't take that long. But it's really complex and difficult stuff, yeah.
Thank you, Finn. Leader?
Yeah, second that, my kids too. So, this is about the long term. But no, I realise this is difficult for some people, but they're just going to have to move with it, because, protecting our silos and protecting our sort of set budgets and ways of doing things just isn't going to cut it. It's not going to cut it in the resource environment we're within. And even if it wasn't that, this is what we should be doing anyway, because it's more effective. At the end of the day, people can't stand different public service organisations bickering amongst each other about whose responsibility what is. They just want to see improvements, and that's where it's at for me. I mean, the money is always the last thing to come. You know, trust is the first thing to be built. You know, if we can form an environment of trust where, you know, each of our public service organisations view each other as sort of equals and respected partners and are willing to open up in the way they work, then I think the money will follow. If you try and do the money thing first, I think you'll probably just risk sort of everything falling down like a house of cards. But you know, I'm keen we're on the right direction there. But people, you know, it might be tough for people, but you know, the era of fiefdoms has to be over. And I'd, you know, recommend that you challenge me as a leader of this organisation as much as any other in that. And if, you know, you see evidence of our organisation sort of building sort of silos and not sort of opening out to our public service partners, you know, hold us to account on that.
Thank you, Leader.
Could I just add something to that, Chair?
Yeah, Linda.
If I could, please. And the leader mentioned the word trust. There's been the Officer Support Group and the development of where we've got to at the moment is something that we haven't experienced previously. There's been a huge amount of effort from partners in the room around getting everybody to get involved in this, so it isn't seen as a council-driven plan, because it isn't. It's a partnership plan, and I think through that approach, both locally and regionally, I'd say as chair of the GSWAG group as well, we've built up a range of trusts where you can have the conversations across the different partners that wasn't happening previously. That is now the trust within the Officer Support Group. My belief is that's already within the BSB executive. So we're starting to build the platforms now to be able to put in the mechanisms for what you mentioned earlier around, well, how is the how going to be done? The how has to be done through trust. And we're building those relationships and built them fairly strongly to where we are now. We've got further ways to go with it, and I think we've got the cornerstones of the activities in place now where everybody is considered as an equal partner, whether they're on the OSG or whether they're part of the Public Service Board, and that's the only way we're going to be able to take this forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lyndon. Right, another question. How will we consider linkages between the PSB's improvement objectives to ensure we are maximising impact?
Yeah, that's actually a bit of work that we've done as an officer support group, looking at all of the things, all of the objectives that we're hoping to achieve, and their contribution to the wellbeing goals, national wellbeing goals, because that's the statutory duty for the Public Service Board, to maximise wellbeing through maximising contribution to these national goals. So we've done quite a lot of work mapping out, you know, if we were undertaking this high-level activity, what impact it would have on another objective and another objective, and making sure so that the resources are maximised, that we're thinking about all of those interconnections. And it's one of the 5 ways of working as well, integration. So, you know, we're directed down that route through the legislation as well.
Thank you for your response.
Chair, we had a few questions on the specific wellbeing objectives. I think Stuart, you was going to ask the one on natural areas. It's more your field.
Yeah, it was, yes. Yeah. Yeah, just let me come on. Yes. So you do another page. Yes. Well, objective 2, I think was the one I was on about. Yeah. Objective 2, develop adaptation and migration responses to the impacts of climate change. Should we undertake all the activities in the short term as a means of determining where we should be focusing our intentions? Is that right on that? Are you right on that, Rachel?
Yeah.
Obviously you want to go that way.
I didn't understand what you said.
Shall I repeat it? Because it's objective 2. Should we be looking to undertake all the activities in the short term, this is under climate change, as a means of determining where we should be focused in our intentions? Sorry. On climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've also had a look at what other PSBs are doing, and they all seem to be fairly short-term things, because climate change is one of these ones where we need to sort of be doing that. So, yeah. But I can't remember.
I think I understand the question, but you can stop me if I've got it wrong. So, with some of climate change is a long-term issue. It's something that's going to really start impacting us further down the road. But it is something that we can take steps now, just like some of the other objectives, just to really better understand again how we as a function, as a collective, can work together with the assets we hold collectively, the information we hold collectively, the relationships with citizens that we have from different perspectives. And we need to invest time in that now if we're going to reap the benefits later on. So.
I mean, in essence, you can't.
No, I would agree with that. And obviously one of the sort of actions that we've put forward is doing local risk assessments. Yeah. So we can already see some of the impacts from extreme weather on our organisations, whether it be flooding or hot weather events. And, across all the public sector organisations, we really need to be aware of, where the risks are. So building an understanding, a collective understanding, will help us when we move forward into some of the medium-term actions to determine, what we need to do that will take slightly longer.
Dina?
I'm just going to come back on that point, thank you, Chair. That's why I was pleased in 5.2 here at page 45, I think, of your agendas, there are clearly defined short-term and longer-term actions and objectives there, because I think that's important.
Tom?
Sorry, just coming back on Stuart's question, I think what he was saying was that the medium-term and the long-term sort of actions, they're around exploring good practice and reviewing. I mean, the longer-term one is about using climate change projections. Is that something we should be doing now rather than something we should be doing in the long term?
If we do the short-term actions, that will help shape where we'll be later on. So the first bit is understanding, and this is an iterative process, and we've got in another couple of years another go at putting things in here. It's very difficult to pin down a long-term action that could be 10, 15 years away until we really understand the problem. So that is one that clearly we will be doing in the longer term, but first we need to take steps towards it, and the path may change as time moves on when we better understand the issue.
I make a comment. I did look at Cardiff, and I think what was the other one that was on there? There were several other counties. They do actually have more definite ones in this subject, because you can get, and they were looking at green roofs, and I think some people were looking at solar, aren't they, Leader? There's sort of some quite positive things we can be looking at that we're not in the relatively short term, because I did think it was a little bit, some of the stuff we do need to be looking at now, and I'd like to see some positives on this one, possibly.
Yeah, actually we did have quite a lot of discussion with this, and with more external partners than just on the PSB as well.
Yeah.
We've got the medium-term action is around building that action plan that will pick up those practical steps. But really, as a first step, we haven't really explored the risks. So rushing, one of the things that the Future Generation Commissioner keeps sort of reiterating is that she doesn't want PSBs to rush into actions when they don't fully understand what the issues are. So that's kind of why we've taken that approach. Because whilst we know there is some really good practice examples out there, and exactly what you said, some of the things that you've mentioned would be the types of things that we'd want to do, and in some cases we're already doing. That we've done quite a lot of work around SUDS in Torvine and things like that. But so having that sort of that first phase where we're looking at the risks, hopefully will be really helpful to this wellbeing objective.
Lyndon?
Thank you, Chair. Fen mentioned a word that I put to earlier, which was that the plan is iterative.
Yeah.
So it will change as we go forward, and priorities will move around. But the suggestions that's gone out in the consultation document around the areas that we suggested the board looks at in the short, medium and longer term is a part of the process that we'll be doing now to fill in some of the gaps around that. Now it could be from part of the consultation. And if you look across Gwent and Wales wider, you'll note that a lot of the wellbeing objectives are quite similar in nature around the key areas around health, wealth and the environment. That seems a common theme across Wales. And there will be linkages on a regional basis on this as well. So part of and Fen and Rich are quite right in, we need to get a baseline to start from. But the baseline will be in Torfaen, but we'll also be looking at what the baseline is across Gwent as a whole and seeing what we can do together as part of that work at the wider regional forum as well.
Stuart? You're not averse to having good ideas from it?
No, I think there's really good ideas in Torfaen.
I think you're right, and I think you're right to say that, because we are being fairly innovative, and I would say that being where I sit with the environmental movement around here. But no, I have noticed there are some good ideas all over the place. I mean, community growing is what, various bits and pieces that we should be looking at. But also, the SUDS is one thing we do reasonably well, I suspect.
I wouldn't want the committee thinking that we're not looking, that we just blinkered into what's going on in Torfaen. Yeah. We bought a Monmouth, we bought a Blaenau Gwent, we bought a Newport and Caerphilly. So, we're in the middle of quite a lot of other authorities, and exactly, you would be expecting us to look at what we could do or link in regionally as part of this process as well, as the wellbeing plans go forward, as well as looking what needs to be done locally in Torfaen.
Linda, if we can I move on to another question, Chair?
Yes,
yeah. We're an impatient lot as councillors. Objective 3, provide children and young people with the best possible start in life. And childhood obesity features in here as a dealing with it as a long-term objective. Why is that? I mean, shouldn't that be? I mean, this is going to probably be what you've answered on an earlier question first. Shouldn't that be something we should be tackling in the short, medium, and the long term?
Well, we mentioned earlier, Councillor Jones, the fact that this is around the added value. There is already an obese strategy for Gwent. There's already a childhood obese strategy in place with public health. So part of the way in which we're building upon this is within the example within that is what can we add the value to that strategy or that process of work. I can see what you're saying. What you're saying is why can't we do things?
This actually comes on the next question as well around the Social Service and Wellbeing Act and the codes of practice that were implemented with effect from last April. We were wondering, because we don't want duplication, we want added value. So you've answered the question. I was going to ask how the objectives on the Health and Wellbeing Act have they been taken into account? And what you're obviously saying there, Lyndon, is they have.
Well, it's Phil Diamond who's been the lead with David Williams for that piece of work, has been extensively engaged in all the PSBs across Gwent. One of the key, because we understand resources and capacity is all stretched, the elements that we try to look at in the well-being of our well-being plan and what will be going to the Social Care and Wellbeing Partnership Board is that we don't duplicate the activities across both boards. There's a lot within there's a reference in our wellbeing plan to people ageing well. That's a specific element within the board's work at the regional level in the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. So what we are looking to do in partnership with people there is what actions come out of people ageing well will be delivered through the partnership board of the Wellbeing and Social Services and Wellbeing Act. So we don't do the duplication.
The key for me with this is prevention is the theme that runs throughout the Health and Wellbeing Act. And the opportunity at the Public Service Board, this board now, that you're working across statutory partners, it gives you a much greater scope to do more. So this is where we really hope that there will be added value objectives
smart ones coming out that take forward that preventive agenda that we've already developed.
You've obviously read the plan very well, because running right through this plan, sustainability is at the heart, and leading to sustainability is early intervention and prevention.
Yeah.
So the cornerstones of what you were mentioning there, Councillor Jones, are very much embedded within what we're thinking that the wellbeing plan is going to be. But the linkages have also been made across to the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. Because what we can't afford is to have two strands of work happening at the same time with the same objective. You have to rationalise and understand who is best placed to deliver on those objectives.
And if you remember, Linda, when you did a council seminar on this, I raised this very issue that, and you answered it very well. You've answered it very well again today. That you've got the great and the good sitting around two different tables, and we've got to make sure that they're both adding different value.
Shall I just add on to that, really? Health have sent their apologies today, and I'm not sure that where Lyndon said earlier on, short term was the first 5 years, medium 5 to 10, 10 to 15 for the longer term. I'm not sure that Health have put these actions together on that same time scale. I think they may be thinking slightly different for their short, medium, longer term, but part of the OSG work around pulling out the definitive actions underneath, which I know you're eager to see, the detail of what we're going to do, who's going to take responsibility, etc. for what. That will come out now over the next sort of few weeks as we're working forward. So it may well be in the final plan some of these things are changed because we'll have more detail that we've worked through and thought through. But I agree, leaving the childhood strategy to the end, to the longer term, when we know there's already activity going on. So as I said, I would just question whether the timescale for that particular objective is the same as the timescale for perhaps some of the others. But just to reassure you, all right?
Yes, Stuart.
One of the things I noticed was how they were including health in things like cycling and walking, which was really interesting, because that's quite. They've got a large estate and they do a lot of things, and they're a large number of employees. So that's really interesting. We see them in what are largely regarded as environmental strategies and transport strategies. So that's quite good if they can get on board with that. We've got a new hospital coming in as well, so that getting them in on that one, if you can work that one, that's actually quite an interesting one.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunities there, and there's a lot of crossover, I feel, with the environment drivers and objectives, and whether or not we can harness those opportunities, let's hope that we will. And that some of that, again, is the understanding, my organisation being able to strategically look with an RM Bevan and understand the connections and the links. And
I mentioned another one because I know we're going to be doing in his committee trees, and the Health Authority has got a massive great estate, and I'd like to see a lot of trees on it, which is mitigation. And I haven't mentioned it before, but so there's another opportunity to cross-fertilise, which you've got a really good thing there. So it's not the obvious things sometimes.
so in the first objective that talks about a green infrastructure strategy, we suggest that we look across the whole estate, the whole public sector estate, and see it as one estate and what benefits can be derived for ecosystems and health from that estate. And that's it's really interesting, and we don't know, but we're committed to looking into that. There's definitely going to be some opportunity there, yeah.
Elizabeth?
Looking on to Objective 5, tackle the intergenerational patterns of poverty and develop economic resilience. What work is being planned or has been done to work with small or medium local businesses who find it financially difficult to pay the living wage, often as a result of conflicting demands from Welsh Government? Rules change, more and more pressure is put on local businesses that will have an impact on the pay. And whilst there are wishes to increase financial security and improve skills for employment, there's no mention of any coordinated work to attract employers to the area. Are there any comments on that?
Yes, probably plenty. I think part of this goes into the how, if I'm honest as well. We're about to go into some. We've had some overarching discussions already in terms of investment, attracting investment into the locality to Torfaen, and also the role of local business and SMEs within that. Like I said earlier, there's a wider economic regeneration approach that the council are taking. So we don't want to be duplicating that. But what we want to be doing is tying ourselves in, not just in Torfaen, but also the opportunities that pose themselves regionally as well. And I know we've referred into the main document some examples of that. I think, with the City Dale stuff, Tidal Lagoon, some of the big infrastructure projects that the citizens of Torfaen can benefit from, because it's on our doorstep essentially. But in terms of the how, and I think this is the next phase, in terms of how we're going to be dealing with that and what's going to emerge, and obviously the priorities in the years of 1 to 5 and beyond, because some of these things are a bit longer term than others, then that detail has to be kind of fleshed out with some of the discussions we've got, and that's why we've got a facilitated workshop coming up on the 14th now, which will start that process, obviously. The evidence is quite clear, because obviously a lot of the evidence has been gathered, and we know the kind of state of play in terms of the empirical evidence and what that's shown us in terms of what it's like to live and like to work in Torfaen at the moment, and the levels that we've got. We do recognise some of the pressures that local businesses are under in terms of the living wage, obviously, and which we will all support. We know some pressures that brings. So there's a lot of work we can be doing with local SMEs, what's referred to here as the foundational economy, I suppose, as well. I'm not committed to that phrase myself, but it's something we kind of recognise. But it's also how we position Torfaen in the region as well. I think that's the important thing for us. So it's making the opportunities, and there's a lot of opportunities that come in, particularly around the M4 corridor as well, with some of the major infrastructure investments. How do we make sure that citizens of Torfaen, young people in particular as well, coming through the education system, have an opportunity to raise the levels of income? So what we're trying to do is look at the wage levels as well, which is the other side of the coin, to look at the sort of the higher paid jobs, whether they're in Torfaen, whether we attract to Torfaen, or whether they're in a close proximity. So it's quite complex in many respects, because there's a number of sort of different audiences again here that we're trying to support. What we're trying to base it is on the evidence that we've got from the wellbeing assessment itself to date, and what people are telling us, and that will be furthered with the consultation. But we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, into the how. And I think some of the things I said earlier, making sure that we've got some tangible outcomes and outputs really, in that first 5-year period is going to be quite critical. But we would be silly, wouldn't we, not to take advantage. We're in Torfaen, it's a small civic area. We'd be very, very silly if we didn't take advantage of what's happening, very close to us, both this side of the bridge, and the other side of the bridge now as well, particularly with the tolls changing, and there's a whole dimension of a new market for us. So
I just come in on a similar topic. On the living wage, Torfaen Council has led the way across councils in Wales in terms of bringing in the living wage for its employers, and that's an excellent thing. And I commend our leader for the work that he's done on that. There's an opportunity now with the public service boards. You all work for big employees. I would hope that you'd at least consider looking at procurement practice when you go into contract work, to see if there's any steps that you can take to help get the living wage moved out more. I mean, one of the biggest protective factors, and that's a term that I'm very familiar with, one of the biggest protective factors for families and well-being is having a decent standard of living, and the living wage is a cornerstone to that.
Point I mentioned about procurement earlier was specifically about trying to generate maybe some additional income through community benefits, but the other side of that is to make sure that we, and we are around the table living wage, employers as well, but obviously there are others that are not, but it's also to make sure that we have a collective approach to that, so that we make sure that across the civic area of Torfaen, we've raised the bar and the standards, recognising some of the pressures also with small business, and I do recognise that.
Leader? Yeah, you're quite right. It's all about bringing as wide a consideration into all the procurement, all the work that we do as possible. Cheap isn't necessarily best. If you can find a way of helping local employers, local small businesses, compete on an even footing, then great. If you can take into account the social benefits of procurement, then that very much fits in with this. So hopefully that's something we can advance working together.
Stuart?
I noticed somewhere in here that we've got a lot of catering, call centre and care work jobs going around the area. A lot of them are not up to living wage. We should be, where possible, making sure they are, especially when we're doing procurement on them, which all our organisations, a lot of them are involved with that. So, most of the people in the PSB are major employers around here, for starters. Certainly, where private contractors are involved, they should be looking at that. That's a discussion that's been had. The other thing I was going to say, in terms of organisations here, we have a chance to make small and medium-sized businesses. There's certain sectors I believe are underrepresented around here. I know get Howard Ponting keeps saying that we've got a very large arts sector that is represented in places like Cwmbran and certainly at the other end of the valley. Musicians, artists, etc. We've got large. I read this somewhere. Large population of that. And the encouragement, where possible, of that with surplus buildings that we've got would maybe something that needs to be looked at. Again, something that came in front of resources scrutiny. There's something that a possibility that we could look at, where the sort of multi-use buildings along the lines of the I can't remember the name. Where you've got multiple use buildings where people can get in cheap office, for artists, craftsmen, and that sort of thing. That may be something we need to look at. And certainly Cwmbran could do with more, because there's not enough to rent properties down there. That sort of thing. I mean, obviously there's been success in Newport having the carriage place and various other places. Maybe we need to make more of those high-tech jobs up as well.
Well, one of the other things I did...
Yeah, I wasn't going too in.
One of the other things that we have talked about, I mentioned procurement as a heading, we've also talked about assets generally, across the civic area as well. And you mentioned a couple of examples there. I think it's also trying to look forward in terms of the industries that we've currently got, obviously, and that's important to look at supporting that. But it's also thinking long term of what the kind of industries of the future are likely to be. And of course, technologically, the world has changed in the last 10 years, so if we're looking at the next 10 or 15 years, they're going to change again. But I think there's a real opportunity at looking at assets across the board, if you like, and we've got to sort of map those first and understand those, and that's land as well as as buildings and so on, and people. So I think there's a piece of work there that we've talked about at the OSG, but again, something we need to flesh out. But that's something that, again, across the piece. If we make some inroads into that, I think there's some real possibilities really to look at efficiencies and work more effectively.
What I forgot, it was the new critical care centre, the new hospital. There's a lot round that could be done. Those technical jobs in there, it's completely new. So the other thing I forgot was digital transformation. That's the one I really meant to go on about. Simply that we've obviously got SRS and jobs there and apprenticeships that we can grow our people with, those sort of quality jobs. Not necessarily young people going to university. Obviously we've got apprenticeships, technical stuff that they can go straight out of school to something where they can learn on the job or apprenticeship. We haven't looked at that at all.
Objective 7. There is no mention of hate crime in this objective. Was any consideration given to including this post-Brexit?
I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, Councillor Jones. Do you want me to go into it in any further depth than my earlier response? Or?
I think you answered the question earlier to some extent on this. It was just... we're going to see a lot of this detail coming out. I think it was just it was again the frustration we had with the high level nature of the plan, really. But there is another point that we touched on earlier about the lack of planning involvement in the mention of planning in the plan. Yeah. That's a mouthful. But in terms of community cohesion, planning involvement should always be involved in crime audits, particularly with new developments. That's another objective that perhaps could be looked at in the detail
these are the sort of things we'd expect to see.
I know Rachel wants to come in on one of the points here, but just to put your mind at rest really around the hate crime. There's Safer Gwent, which is the OPCC's forum for looking at community safety and community cohesion, hate crime across Gwent. So there's already pieces of work happening across the Safer Gwent footprint that we wouldn't want to be duplicated within the wellbeing plan. There's all, as we mentioned earlier, there's going to be elements within this plan that people are going to say, but mine isn't in there. Why isn't that in there? Why is that? That will need to be fleshed out as part of the ongoing planning process. But what we will be avoiding at all costs where we can is we won't be duplicating activity where that activity is going on somewhere else. Because I'd expect questions coming back from members and saying, well, why are you doing that when it's already happening over there? And I think, Rachel, you wanted to mention something on the planning?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we were doing the wellbeing assessment, we worked very closely with our forward planning colleagues and shared a lot of data. And similarly, when or if there's a refresh of the local development plan, we've got data sets and information that they'll be able to use as well. So we recognise that there's quite a lot of overlap, and both plans have got potential to impact on wellbeing in Torfaen. So just rest assured really that the links are there between the forward planning team in the council and this plan. And we do see it as important to make the links between both of those documents there.
That's fine. I mean, we ask these questions because when you read something that's high level, certain things will jump out at you. And you've answered the question very well. Thank you.
Great, drop the question.
Taking out the...
Stuart?
I must admit, I did another one in Sophie Howell's reports. Was that whole stuff about plan? She went on one about aggregates and all the rest of that detailed sort of stuff about. I didn't know that was in this discussion at all. Even have you seen that there? That Adrian Wilcox and company did about resources in our communities. It was in your two areas of work. I actually put that in there, and I looked at it because I declare an interest. I'm actually on the planning committee, and we've done all that stuff where you looked at LDP stuff about what you've got in the community in terms of resources that come out. We've decided not to go anywhere near there, thankfully. But that's one of those things that I hope, in terms of looking at the natural resources and the climate resilience and stuff like that, it's all in there.
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Peter?
Can we move on to now we've talked a lot about the wellbeing plan, and are you going to publish that by May? Is that the plan?
That's a good point, yeah.
Now, what I'm really interested in now is to try and pin you down a little in terms of the board proposes to take the steps you're going to take to meet the things that we want to look at, really, the added value action plans. What's the sort of, when are you going to produce that? What's the time scale? When will we see it? Those sort of questions. Can you give us any sort of broad answers to those types of questions?
I'll do my very best, Councillor Jones, and I'm sure colleagues can add to that. The Officer Support Group are already considering now what needs to go in under these objectives as those as part of the wellbeing plan, the doing part of it. We're going to be working over that now, right up to the point where once consultation ends, that will get fed into the process. Whether we need to make any changes to the plan as a matter of consultation. But in the background, our activity is going to continue to go on right up to the point of sign-off. So the sign-off within each of the public bodies are at different times because of their board meetings are at different times in the year. We're aiming to bring a report to Council in March of the wellbeing plan. Is it March or
February.
February. February.
Council, I think Council will have it February to sign off as one of the partners, and it's March it goes to the PSB.
Yeah, March to the PSB, and then we publish it in May. So that's the timelines that we will be looking at and developing the actions that sit under that, up to the point of sign-off.
So will you then be publishing sort of a grid of actions sit, alongside this? Will there be a mechanism then for monitoring that, and will there be an annual report? That I'm interested in those sort of processy things, so I can understand.
There will be a grid of actions that will sit under the plan. The details will need to be hammered out of what that will look like. There will be an annual report of the PSB. We'll also have to come to scrutiny.
You've answered my question.
So, you as the scrutinising, you are the statute. By statute, we have to go to scrutiny. Scrutiny is partners, so it won't just be local authority officers, they're partners. But that's exactly how we intend to plan it out. So you have opportunities to question the PSB on how things will be taken forward, what's included, and we can answer your query. Because you are scrutinising on behalf of the partnership, not as council or as for the council.
No. I think, from my perspective, we've made a good start today. And I'm really grateful for all the responses you've given us and all the people. Stuart?
I'd like to say thank you to everybody. And is there anything anybody wants to... can I say this? Is there anything anybody would like to add at all before we wrap up?
Okay, Jeff?
Leader?
Yeah, just that's probably good. What Lyndon said is a good way to finish. Really, this is the start of a process, and I think when actions develop, it'd be a good opportunity then to really get under the skin of some of the issues and try and take them up then.
Just to add to that, I suppose from, if I can speak for myself and Fen as well, and just to the process to date, and in support of what Lyndon said earlier, is that I think back to the kind of trust and the spirit of it, that, we're working together collectively, and I think that's the important thing to come forward with some of those actions, really. So it's really important from the officer support group that myself and Fen are on, but I'm sure it's at the same level at the PSB, that people are trying to work in the right spirit publicly to drive it forward. So it's just long way that can continue, I suppose, is my... But thanks very much for inviting us as well.
I would like to say none of you ducked any questions. Tom?
Yeah, just going back to Lyndon's point around the timeline and whether this committee needs to be involved in looking at that how, the draft of the how, and whether there is an opportunity to look at, because that seems to be where the interest lies, really, is, what exactly are we going to be doing. So when your report goes to council in February, is that going to be complete with a grid of the how, or is that being developed on the back of that? I just when we sort of discuss when we meet next, and we need to ensure that the how is to your satisfaction, and also that the 5 ways of working, we're making those linkages between the objectives, etc., and the different actions. I just wondered, what is the ideal timeline to be involved before it's all signed off?
Because I think part of the discussions that we had is that we were a little concerned that maybe we were scrutinising a little bit too early, and that we wanted to see a little bit more information, more drilled down, more timelines, more outcomes, more actions. And I think part of the discussions that we've had previously is that we'd like to be re-scrutinise the final version before it's approved is, I think, what you're trying to say as well, Tom. So.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can work to some of the, if that comes as a scrutiny recommendation back, we can sit down and we can work with Tom to engage with you. It's really, you know, it's your comments and questions, they've been really helpful in formulating things forward and you know, testing questions as well, which is very helpful for us because it's things that you've asked today that will help us through our next process. I think the important thing to also remember as a scrutiny group is that the plan and the actions are iterative. So they are going to be reviewed regularly. They may change. We can get to a point of getting a draft. Again, those actions may not be to the entire detail that you as scrutiny members may want to see, but they would be a factual position in time of where we are. Because a lot of the work we have to do, and put members on notice with this, will require a lot more depth of information gathering from our side that will help us get to some of those endpoints. The Commissioner calls them deep dives, where you try to unpick a problem a little bit further. So we can certainly bring a draft back to members when the plan is done, what initially that we could work to as partners of working that through. And Rachel's either going to kick me no or add something to that. But I'm sure we can involve with members.
I was just going to add to that. I think discussions at PSB executive level has been around using a particular problem, one of the wellbeing objectives, to unpick that how. So it's going to kind of fall across a bit beforehand, but actually when we get into working, when the plan becomes live and we get into working around one of the objectives, and it's the healthy lifestyles one, we're going to be able to look at how we need to work together in a bit more detail, so we can kind of describe beforehand what were the areas where we think we're going to need to make changes. But until we get into the detail of the challenge, we won't exactly know what it looks like, because it's an iterative process, and you know, it's almost having a problem there to get your teeth into and allows you to unlock that how. So, yeah.
Can I say as well, it's a little bit difficult for us for myself as on the Officer Support Group to anticipate where the leaders are going to go with this. But we need commitment and resource from that level, and we don't know what's going to happen on, at the workshop. And if the leaders get behind us and they're going to be bold and they're going to empower us and they're going to be committed and provide the resources, we're ready to go. But we have that stage yet to come.
Would you like to reply to that?
No question then.
This sounds a stiff question, sounds.
I think that last point that Rachel maybe did pick up on around that, how are you going to work, and it would be good to see that first example when it's worked up, so we're clear about what in the committee may even be able to involve themselves in the process as well.
Thank the members, officers and the executives for tuning up. Thank you very much.
You can log off. I don't have to do it, okay?
Does that actually?
Recommendations?
Well, the important thing is, Tom, though, that we're going to have an opportunity to pre-scrutinise the
Full council.
Yeah,
Or
so we need to tell them that we want to do that.
Yes.
That's absolutely essential. And we also wanted to scrutinise when it's ready, pre any publication, that the definitive actions.
Yeah.
They're two key ones.
There were some good points came out there, weren't there? I'm trying to get my head around
Definitely the easy language, the easy English
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. We asked them if they.
And what was yours?
Which is what?
Yes.
Business
Uh,
one.
I noticed I was listening because obviously being a business on it.
Go on.
Oh, we still.
Yeah, you stood in.
Yeah, I thought that was the only evasive question, the answers we got.
Do you think you didn't know about it?
I don't know.
I don't think they do business.
I don't think there's an awful lot of involvement.
Well, I've got the impression that's what it was.
There's a lot of businesses in there.
Can we just check, Tom, in terms of
Just go through what Tom's
what you've
noted
jotted
down.
down in
Yeah,
terms
I
of
think that's it.
recommendations as you were making notes.
Yeah.
Some of the points that I picked up, how are we ensuring we're not just getting feedback from the usual suspects? So is possibly a recommendation around reviewing the processes for ensuring that we hit as many consultees as possible, so we're not just using, like you say, the same business groups that always get the same volunteers.
Because that did come across that they are using the same consistently. In fact, they use the terminology fatigue, and that sort of tells me that they are the engagement team or whoever are constantly using the same groups of people, and I think that we should be mindful of that fatigue, that we should be looking to go and get extra.
When I brought up that innovative thing, the two down that end actually hit on that quite well, so I think you've got a good point there. It's the same old, it's a bit tired, isn't it? And I brought a second one was about the more innovative ways. I'm not convinced how we do it, other than look at what the other councils have done, because social media, younger people being innovative ways, it may be a different thing again. We've got the consultation we do normally, but we've got to be doing things differently. I'm not convinced about it.
Yeah, and in terms of accessibility, we had a detailed discussion on accessibility, and I do think it's an issue that they need to consider.
Yeah.
I think they've missed the boat a little in terms of they've launched the consultation already.
Yeah.
But things like easy read, plain English,
That's right.
that needs to be taken into account because this is a document for all citizens.
Yeah.
And it mustn't be, while it's high level and strategic, that doesn't mean it should be difficult to understand.
Yeah, and I picked up your point about looking at whether the Learning Disabilities Wales could assist in this process as well.
Yeah, they could look. I mean, a good starting point would be to look at the Welsh Government approach, who use Learning Disability Wales. The Welsh Government have got an accessibility policy. We didn't at all discuss it in committee, but I mean that's a given it for statutory bodies, so I didn't think we needed to. But they certainly need to. I think that all of us agreed that these documents need to be as easy to understand as possible. Plain English proofing we suggested, didn't we?
Suggest you look at the Cardiff one, because this Cardiff document was so much easier to read. I read it, and it was laid out in boxes with titles. It did what you said there, and admit they might have more money or whatever, but it was so much easier to read, and it was logical. I think they even did a précis for it. You know, executive.
Well, Welsh Government, for example, will do a child's version of a document, but to young children and young people's version. Well, they do. I mean, but taking on board what Lyndon said about resources, I do think this document is an important document for everyone. It has to be accessible.
I mean, the other point is this versus PSB, and all organisations work together. I don't think that's a valid argument, to be honest. Simply on the something like Health Authority, and they've all got resources. It should be done the best possible thing we can do. I think it's a valid argument. They've all graphic artists and people like that.
I mean, they also mentioned the use of infographics, which they currently couldn't resource, but they would look at it in the future. I think it also leads on to the need for the PSB to actually promote themselves better, so people actually understand what the PSB is all about. Because if people see a consultation by the PSB, they might already be switched off if they don't actually know what the PSB does. So again, they did mention that they would perhaps look to do something around promoting themselves when the wellbeing plan was actually launched. There was obviously a question around social housing and why that didn't feature more prominently within the plan. I don't know whether members felt that does.
We felt it should. That's what we said it should. I think that's the recommendation. It should feature in the plan. Because I went back to the gentleman who was the guest speaker on from Mellin, and I said, listen to what you said, Adrian, and I said, I do think social housing, and it was the supply, wasn't it, we were talking about.
And I think the other one you bounced me into was the quick gains. That was another bit about the environment one was one. They made the point about getting their quick gains. That would be a question. What are their quick gains, initial gains? You need to know that. That'd be a good question.
I would hope that would be more obvious when they did detailed action plan.
But there are some they hadn't considered. I think.
About planning not being included.
Yeah.
I mean,
there was no mention of it at all.
And it came up in the general comments, and it also came up under community cohesion.
You raised another point about, they said work that what you said about the work they already do, and then the work the PSB does. There's some indication in there that's actually a good point, but actually need to find out what they consider the work they could do. You could actually map that out. That's actually, it strikes me that that's something they could do, because he's saying that housing is something they already do, but then if there's stuff they're not going to touch because they consider it a day job, you see what I'm saying? Yeah. Then there's stuff that they won't touch because that stuff is right. Then what's the unique stuff they're going after, like innovative, whatever. So there's stuff they consider that's already been done well. They could actually tell us that, couldn't they?
Yeah, I don't think it was clear from the document why, if something wasn't in there, why it had been omitted.
Explicit about stuff.
I think there isn't. I don't think there should be anything that they're not going to touch, because all of those elements should be fed into this in some way. If they don't want to do work twice, but there are things exactly. But there are things that are. There's always going to be some element of planning. There's always going to be some element of housing that isn't being. As part of a wider group, that will change. Some of the things that they are doing will change because it's being done on a bigger plan. So that there are elements of crossover that they can't include because of duplicating work, but there are going to be things that need to be fed in as separate things themselves. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
And you want planning in there as well? Okay, let's do it. You okay with that, Jeff?
Yeah, the other thing that I picked up on was, and it's all about child obesity. When we asked them, or he was asked by us, should it be in the short term? And it was a very, I don't know, the answer was, do you find it a little bit?
Well, the answer was they've already got a plan in the Social Care and Wellbeing Act. and they want to.
So why is that in here
Why
then?
is it an objective? Is
Isn't it?
you know, why is it included as a?
Yeah.
I think it's long term. Why is it included as a?
Well, he didn't give an answer, did he, really?
I think what you've got to be careful with these questions is you flush out the ones they want in there, and if we ask explicit questions and it's a yes, no, we're at least getting somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, it's the same with when Elizabeth asked about the living wage. Now, she obviously is a businesswoman. She realises the impact it's having on you, innit? But pay the living wage, but helping some other way.
Well, what a lot of organisations don't understand, the nitty-gritty of running, and it's you know, I'm only talking my own experience, but also of other people that I know that run small businesses. And you have the Welsh Government that are, you know, this is a Welsh Government-led plan in effect. But you've got the Welsh Government that are bringing in, they've done a reassessment of business rates that already closed some businesses down because of the hike in business rates. You've got central government that has things like statutory sick pay and maternity pay. They were all covered, they were all funded by central government through national insurance contributions. National insurance contributions haven't reduced, but the responsibility for that money now lands with the small employer. Yeah. We now have the pension regulator, and within 3 years, employers will be expected to be contributing to everybody that's eligible in this scheme. So there are hidden and increasing costs all the time for small employers that will have an impact on their availability to increase wages. And that's what the understanding, that understanding needs to be considered.
Well, that's what you didn't answer, wasn't it?
No, and I don't know whether there's anybody that's on the board or within the partnership that can give that sort of meat on the bones in relation to small businesses, because small businesses account for a massive percentage of money.
He did. Maybe there ought to be something more explicit around that issue as a recommendation.
So, I mean, we both run charities, so we do.
But I also did raise the other side of the coin, where Torfaen are doing a lot of work around the living wage for their employers, and there ought to be some sort of way of, and two other people said they have living wage employees. So, I mean, all these statutory bodies, they should be working in unison on this.
What amazes me with that, as being an employer myself, is why don't they just turn around and say, if it's a living wage, pay the living wage. Put it up to a living wage. It's going to cripple people like Elizabeth and me. You know, but at the end of the day, that's going to be passed on somewhere, isn't it? I can't understand why they got a minimum wage and then a living wage. Because if you don't pay the living wage, you're the bad guys, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know, people come up to me and say, well, why are you paying us the living wage? I said, do all right now. You know what I mean? You've got to get that money in from somewhere. If Torfaen pays the living wage, obviously somebody's got to pay for it.
The only problem is if you...
Well, why have two?
Yeah.
I think you got it in the stadium now, haven't you? Down, was it on the news this morning where the security men are getting less money than the people selling hot dogs? Big thing this morning on that, but we can't change the world. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I've got a couple more as well. I think there's that clarification was still required around the short, medium and long term, because although initially it was said 5, 10, 15, I think they've got to be consistent throughout their one document.
If you go and look at the Cardiff document, I think it was Bridgend document, they actually spell that out better, because the point we were trying to get at, where you have definite timelines, they actually do that, but ours is still woolly, I'm afraid. And when they get back to, if they get through to their meeting, they will spell that out. It needs to be clarified in a lot more positive sense.
There needs to be unanimity as well.
And there's one more, was to look at the activity regarding bringing in jobs into Torvine and Objective 5, which seems to need to be bolstered.
The job thing worried me because when I read it, it said catering, it said all those those jobs which we've got already, but it didn't seem to be very aspirational. There are other jobs. We heard the stuff going in Newport. We're talking about building trains and the other technical jobs, but we need the other jobs. We also need to recognise the high-level jobs we've got here already, and whether we bring support for them. Like the digital inclusion stuff, the technical stuff, and art, whatever. We need that kind of quality job in the place. Alongside support for small businesses, which I go very much for.
Meeting closed. Thank you very much for attending.